Hello and welcome to Atlantic Debrief, the Atlantic Council Europe Center's internet show and podcast on the most pressing issues impacting transatlantic relations today. My name is Jörn Fleck and I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to welcome as our guest today Valbona Zeneli, a non-resident Senior Fellow with the Europe Center. Val, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you.
We're here today to discuss President Xi Jinping's visit to Europe, going last week, May 5th through May 10th, to 3 European capitals from Paris to Belgrade to Budapest, marking his first visit to Europe for 5 years since 2019. And there's been a lot of discussion about the significance of this visit by the Chinese head of state, President Xi, to Europe amidst a hardening line in the European Union on Chinese economic practices, economic overcapacities, and a push to de-risk from dependencies and vulnerabilities to the Chinese economy. There's a lot to unpack in this visit, so I want to jump right into the discussion. And maybe we can start, Val, with a quick assessment from your perspective of the intentions, both on the European side and President Macron welcoming President Xi in Paris and the Pyrenees, but also from the Chinese side, and whether this is just the continued effort of both a charm offensive and an effort to divide and conquer across European EU member states and beyond.
Well, thank you, Jörn. As you point out very well in your question, there's been a lot of changes in Europe since 2019 when the last visit of President Xi Jinping took place. I believe that this is a visit that was aimed from Beijing, from official Beijing, to really signal China's increased economic, political, and diplomatic influence in Europe, and also using very strong narratives, so really using very well public diplomacy too. That is how it was also explained in the Chinese media. It was seen as a celebration of friendly relations of China with European states. And actually, the official reason of the visit was to celebrate the 60th anniversary of relations with France and 75 with Hungary. So that was the official reason of the visit. As you pointed out, the 3 countries, I think the selected destinations, the 3 countries, they in themselves carry a very strong narrative, public diplomacy significance for China. But I believe that in the text of the visit, I think that the idea or the aim for President Xi Jinping was to really fend off some of the looming trade war with the European Union. As you pointed out, there is a hardening line when it comes to trade relations between China and European Union countries. But I believe also seeking President Macron more Beijing-friendly stance in some, areas, in order to kind of dilute the growing concerns that exist in the European Union, both when it comes to trade issues, subsidies, overcapacities, but also the second most important reason is the China-Russia relations and the support that has been given to Russia in the last few years during the war in Ukraine. And then we have the second stage of the visit, which is Serbia and Hungary. And of course, this is, 2 countries that offered a very warm welcome to President Xi Jinping. And I think he was praised on how China's foreign policies are benefiting economically and diplomatically both countries. And then the third point of the visit, I believe, is, while we have more convergence on or trends of convergence in the transatlantic view on China, I think this was seen as a way to counterbalance the United States and, strengthen relations with the European Union and try to divide the transatlantic community.
So we've talked about and you've laid out the intentions and the rationale behind the visit. especially on these key items of President Macron and France driving forward, for example, the electric vehicle investigation at the European Commission level, growing concern across Europe about overcapacity and some of the other well-known economic practices of China that are challenging European but also U.S. competitiveness globally. What do you think has been the impact of this visit? Was it successful in, especially on the French side, and the European public perception in changing anything and driving a wedge, if from the Chinese point of view, between the United States and Europe, but also between individual European countries?
Well, that's a great question. I will say that this was a visit on both sides with mixed results. First of all, let's start with France. Compared to the visit back in 2019, the two sides did not agree on any trade deals. This time, we should remember back in 2019, really there was a big amount of multi-billion trade deals going from agriculture to Airbus passenger planes. This time, actually, we did not see any big deals. We did not see much when it comes to, the aim also of President Macron in the framework of also how the European Union is looking at trade relations to really lower the temperature on some concerns that have to do with subsidies and other issues that you mentioned out. So I think that from that perspective, when it comes to the visit to France, President Xi visit did a little to reverse that course. President Macron was only left with the promise from the Chinese president that he will work together and China will do its best, Beijing will do its best to create, this global truce during the Olympics in Paris during the summer. So even there, I have, my doubts in how much, we'll see implementation of that. So mainly that was the main thing that President Macron got from President Xi Jinping during the visit. And also, the promise not to impose preemptive tariffs on French cognac. I would say those were the two main real deliverables. Now, on the positive side, we saw that, there was a much united language of the European Union in the messages, also some of the messages that President Macron sent out. Even the fact of inviting the president of the EU Commission, von der Leyen, to be part of the meetings, or even having consultations beforehand with Chancellor Scholz, I think that showed more on the European, unity when it comes to issues that relate to China. On the second part of the visit, as you pointed out, both on Hungary and in Serbia, there was, this was a wonderful, huge welcome on both countries. We saw the signature of multilateral agreements. In the case of Serbia, there was more on the start of the implementation of the free trade agreement with China, starting July 1st. And here we have to point out that it's the first European country that has a free trade agreement with China. So that matters too. So that was a signal. When it comes to Hungary, we have the establishment, even the language, counts of all-weather comprehensive strategic partnership for the new era. So both countries, Hungary and Serbia, are two strategic partners of China in the European Union and also have been the most important countries in the former 16+1 initiative, nowadays 14+1, with the countries having left, Baltic countries having left the initiative. So it was mixed. I would say there were mixed results, but I would say that there was not much achieved when it comes to issues with trades, overcapacity and subsidies. I would say that really we saw, I would say, mutual distrust also when it comes to the visit in France between President Macron and President Xi Jinping. And we saw that even President Xi Jinping dodged the topic and the issue when it comes to the support that China has been given to Russia. And that is, really providing key components for Russia to continue the aggressive and brutal war in Ukraine.
So on Ukraine and Europeans' efforts and President Macron's efforts to push President Xi on that support that China has been providing to Russia, non-military, although some of it is very much in the dual use category. So you're saying there we've basically had a let's continue to agree to disagree type outcome.
Very similar conversation that both Secretary Blinken had a few weeks ago with the Chinese authorities. So what we have seen, President von der Leyen, new President von der Leyen, a few months ago. So I think we are in the same line there. It's important that those issues are brought up. We know that President von der Leyen even threatened, that the European Union will use, its, measures if the Chinese authorities will not change their perspective and their behavior in this framework. However, so these conversations were brought up, were part of the topics, but we did not see any big outcome. And so that will say that this was not successful.
Let me talk really briefly before coming to the Western Balkans about Hungary. That's an EU member state. Continued major investment by China, deals with China on this visit to Budapest. How concerned are you and how concerned do you think the European Union should be about that relationship China is building with an EU member state, after all, in Hungary? What does that mean for, if I can add, what does that mean? How much has this visit and the Budapest link specifically the potential for slowing down that de-risking and economic security agenda that especially Commission President von der Leyen has been pushing?
Well, absolutely. Great point, Jörn. So I think it's not just, how Beijing strengthens bilateral relations, with countries in Europe. That is not an issue. Each country has these, part of strategic dialogues. The issue is that how they impact the unity of the European Union, and even more, how they impact the unity of the transatlantic economy and partnership when it comes to China. So it's not relations per se. There's nothing bad there if two countries are strengthening economic, political, and diplomatic relations. The point here is that since the 16+1 initiative, but then later with the Belt and Road initiative, so I want to recall here that 16+1 actually was established 1 year before the Belt and Road initiative. It was kind of the first try of the Chinese authorities to see how that will work up, in the European continent context. And so from that moment, I think the dilemma there has been that the Chinese authorities wanted to have to bilateralize relations in the framework of the European Union instead of talking to the European Union. And I think that was also, the visit that, started with France, because there was an opening there considering the idea of, President Macron's strategic autonomy that the Chinese for a very long time have been supporting. So I think that is the main reason. And then the second point is that how that impacts not only the issues that have to do with, areas, important economic areas such as electric vehicles and with the de-risking, strategy, which the Chinese are still tending to call it decoupling, and it's not decoupling. But also when it comes to foreign and security decision-making in the European Union. Unfortunately, we have already seen in the past that countries such as Hungary and some other countries have vetoed decision-making when it comes to China in the European Union. And sometimes, we have had, watered-down declarations on China because of these countries. So that is where I would like to see that. Not so much how much they strengthen economic relations, but how that impacts strategies and policies of the European Union as a whole. And here we need to say that although we're, aiming to have this stronger, more unity in the European Union, that is not the case. And countries, we have different countries are diverse when it comes to how they look at China economically from the technological perspective. but also what is the gap that exists in these countries between the policymakers community and security community and the business community. And we see that not only in Eastern Europe, but we also see that in Western European countries.
Coming to the Western Balkans, which, Chinese influence in that region is also one of your areas of expertise. The package of deals and the reception, the public diplomacy platform that President Vučić of Serbia provided to President Xi seemed to be a step up from the other stops. It seemed. What are the implications of this strengthening of Chinese-Serbia relations for the wider region, and also for that region's perspective of joining the European Union, given that there's a number of candidates for EU accession, including Serbia?
Serbia, from the very beginning, since back in 2012, the establishment of 16+1 has been seen as a strategic partner in the Western Balkans. And it makes sense because it's also the stronger economy and the larger economy in the Western Balkans. But I believe that when we look at Chinese influence in Serbia, or broader in the Western Balkans, we should not divide that from the overall strategies and aims and objectives that China has for the European Union. Because I think Western Balkans is part of this, whole European continent strategy. And it's important for the geostrategic location, but also with the proximity with the European Union in terms of the EU markets and the importance of that. For already China, in the last few years, the second largest trading partner in the Western Balkans. For some countries, even the biggest, the largest, that's in the case of Serbia. And also, if you look at the total investment, is around 40% of the aggregate investment in the Western Balkans. Now, here we have to be clear, it's not all investment. I'll say that more than 50%, 60% actually is concessional lending. But it is important because in the narrative is explained in the public diplomacy that this is a win-win situation for those countries. Those are countries that are in need for financial support. There's a huge infrastructure gap between the Western Balkans and European Union countries, Western European Union countries. So it's a perfect place for the Chinese with little money actually to make an impact economically, but also diplomatically for those countries. So in the case of Serbia, it's not only been economic, deals in past years, but actually relations between Serbia and China have extended beyond economics one. And here I'm talking about a package that was signed a few years ago, almost $3 billion, that included also military purchases that increased Chinese influence in the country. One very important point is that the visit happened on the 25th anniversary, actually, of the mistaken, bombing of the Chinese embassy in Serbia. And that actually, what's used in the narrative of President Xi Jinping during his visit in talking about not only the shared future with Serbia, but actually finding a ground to criticize NATO and the Western community for going against, being hostile to China. So there is already there, just the date of the visit has a very strong political and diplomatic impact. A free trade agreement, as I pointed out, was signed, and we should not also forget the cybersecurity concerns with the Huawei-led project in Belgrade. That's the smart city, and so the smart surveillance cameras in Belgrade. That has been an issue that has been criticized also from European Union institutions and authorities. I think you also seconds. The point. Yeah, the point, how does that impact the future? I think it impacts through the standards and practices. It impacts through the rule of law, lack of transparency, higher levels of corruption when there's no transparency in how these deals are made. State-owned companies actually, implementing those projects or not having a big economic churn, spillover positive impact in the economy. Environmental standards, labor standards, And also, as I pointed out, foreign and security policy, which should be one of the conditions for those countries in the EU integration. So long term, I think it negatively impacts through the standards and practices.
A lightning round last question for you. From a Washington, D.C. perspective, U.S. decision maker, policymaker perspective, what are the one or two things with regards to EU-China relations that you think Washington, D.C. ought to be watching closely in the coming months?
I think Jörn, all the issues that we mentioned here, from security and defense, from trade issues, from bilateralization of relations with countries, from infrastructure, resilience of the European countries, all those issues are very important in the agenda. What we are seeing recently, and I hope this will continue in the future, that we're seeing trends of convergence in terms of transatlantic relations when it comes to China. And I think the reasons for that is that China's muscular diplomacy and assertiveness in international relations. We should not forget what happened with what is called the dark side of globalization when it comes to China, because of what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic and the real dependence that we had seen. Trade disbalances in Europe, we should not forget. So trade is very important for Europe and China. However, it has changed a little bit on how it is viewed. If it before was win-win cooperation, I don't think that is how it's seen anymore. It's more of in a competition, negotiating partner framework, because trade disbalance has increased tremendously in the last 20 years, reaching more than 400 billion just in 2022. The Sino-Russian relationship, that is another important element that has pushed the Europeans to get closer to the Americans. But also what we have seen in the United States in terms of U.S. bipartisanship when it comes to relations with China. And that is an important element, I think, that strengthened this transatlantic convergence. So I think we should not overlook the importance of the not only security relations between the United States and European Union, but also economic relations, because I think that is the backbone of transatlantic relations.
On that note, Val, thank you so much for sharing your assessments of President Xi of China's visit last week to Europe. That's all we have time for today. Thank you again, and thank you to our viewers. Continue to watch Atlantic Debrief and more programming and analysis from the Europe Center on all things U.S.-Europe relations and Europe-China relations and their implications for the transatlantic partnership. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.